Hello, Robs. We're back with another book. A Mother in History, Marguerite Oswald, The Mother of the Man Who Killed Kennedy by Jean Stafford. It's a 1966 book, Bantam Books publication, obviously nonfiction. Originally cost 75 cents. And instead of giving an introduction, I'm just going to go right to it since November's half over. I guess I could show you these pages. If you want to read them, you can read them later. Pause the video, read them as you will. Sections of this book appeared originally in McCall's magazine, and I would like to thank Miss Barbara Lawrence of its staff for her editorial acumen. I am grateful, too, for the contributions of Mr. Lon Tinkle, blah, blah, blah. Section 1, Chapter 1. In a tidy, unexceptional little house, on an unexceptional block of similar houses, they were seedy, but they were not squalid, and in some of their front yards roses grew. In Fort Worth, Mrs. Marguerite Oswald received me one steamy May afternoon without preambulatory small talk. Beyond asking me whether I found the air conditioning cool or not cool enough, it was exactly right. She plunged straight away into her memoirs, or rather into those parts of her memoirs having to do with the arrest and murder of her son, Lee Harvey Oswald, that catapulted her to international renown. In the recitative of this, President Kennedy was little more than the deus ex machina, essential but never on stage. Her voice had a considerable histrionic range. In a moment's time, she could shift her tone from, and I don't want to break the spine, so resignation to irony, from sonorous patriotism to personal indignation, but at all times, essential intelligence was at the control. You're damn right about that. There was essential intelligence at control here, regulating the pitch and volume as she entered the successive roles of mother, citizen, widow, public figure. There was a suggestion of elocution lessons nearly forgotten but learned well long ago. And there was more than a suggestion of rehearsal and past performance. She spoke almost always in complete sentences. She was never visibly caught off guard. She declared at the beginning that she was not a mother defending her son, but was speaking for history, since history, she is persuaded, has been deformed by the press and by the report of the Warren Commission's inquiry into President Kennedy's assassination, which is all lies, lies, lies. That is true. I had come to Texas to see Mrs. Oswald because she is, as she was frequently to tell me, a mother in history. And while she remains peripheral to the immediate events of the Dallas killing, she is inherent to the evolution of the reasons for them. She is inherent, that is, if we accept, as I do, the premise that her son had something to do with the assassination, and accept the further premise that the child is father of the man, we need to know the influences and accidents and loves and antipathies and idiosyncrasies that were the ingredients making up the final compound. I hope that Mrs. Oswald would be able to tell me what these had been. And I remind you, I am not a professional, I'm not even an amateur reader. For all practical purposes, she was her son's only parent, since his father died before he was born, and her later marriage lasted too short a time to have much effect on him. Relatives are often, perhaps more often than not, the last people on earth to know anything about each other. Still, there was the possibility, and I had come down from Connecticut to explore it. Mrs. Oswald, an inactive Lutheran, believes that if ye seek, ye shall find, that at last truth will prevail, and to correct the false impressions of her son and herself, under which most of the nation and most of the world labor, she is dedicating her life to her own investigation. From morning, when she rises early, until night, she is at work researching the case, collating newspaper stories, studying theories of conspiracy, right-wing, left-wing, wingless, Catholic, Baptist, Jewish, black Muslim, anarchist, fascist, federalist, masterminded by the cops, masterminded by the robbers. Hey, she's thorough. I wonder if she ever released another book, or I wonder if she ever released a book that had been propounded from Los Angeles to West Berlin, reading between the lines of the Warren Report and scrutinizing the errors, omission, the errors, omission? That doesn't sound right. The errors of omission, sorry, pardon, omission in it, and those of commission, and the ambiguities and the garbles. She accepts any invitation anywhere to appear on platforms or on television screens, to pass on her observations and to interpret them. For several months after the assassination, she was strenuously peripatetic, popping up all over in this country and in Canada. I have to say, Jean Stafford has used some clunky language. I understand she wants to sound intelligent, but strenuously peripatetic, popping up. I mean, that's just clunky. My theme is the American way of life, she said to me. And this, of course, is what I talked about. I want the truth known, she said, sitting upright on a sofa, her hands crossed at the wrist, palm upward. I believe the American people are entitled to the truth, and I believe they want to know. Now, I will agree that immediately after the assassination and while President Johnson was taking the place of President Kennedy, let me say in all respect that this was not the time to bring these truths before the public. But after his time in office, most people think I don't agree, but that's beside the point, that he is a very powerful president, and the assassination itself has subsided. I think these truths should be leaked now, and if in the leaking they can prove to me that my son was the assassin of President Kennedy, I won't commit suicide or drop dead. I will accept the facts as a good, straight human being. But up until this day, they have not shown me any proof, and I have things in my possession to disprove many things they say. I understand all the testimony off the cuff is in Washington and will be locked up for 75 years. Well, I've got news for you. It will not be for 75 years, because if today or tomorrow I am dead or killed, what I have in my possession will be known. And I, in my lifetime, have got to continue what I have been doing, using my emotional stability and speaking out whenever I can. Would you like a cup of coffee? A genial lady. Because there was no hiatus between the proclamation of unwavering purpose and the hospitable colloquial question, and because both were delivered in the same tone and at the same pace, I did not immediately take it in. But in a moment I did, and I said I would. The drinking of coffee in Texas is almost as involuntary as respiration. One night I went into a restaurant in Dallas where on every table there was a glass pot of coffee kept bubbling over a candle warmer. One or two of my guests poured out cups for themselves at once following this aperitif with the Jack Daniels and Johnny Walker I had brought in a brown paper bag. I had forgotten, or had never known, that in Texas you produced your own liquor in public places and ordered setups just as in the olden times. While Mrs. Oswald busied herself in the kitchen that abutted on the dinette at the end of the living room, she did not pause in her soliloquy. She asked herself questions and answered them in patient asides. All the news mediums said he was such a failure in life. A failure in life, she cried out in stunned disbelief. He was 24 years old when he was murdered. The attorneys that are interviewing these witnesses make $100 to $150 a day, and they never lived this type life. Lee Harvey, a failure? I am smiling. I think it took courage for a young boy to go to Russia at 20 for whatever reason he went. I find this a very intelligent boy, and I think he's coming out in history as a very fine person. Generally dropping the final G's of gerunds in a relaxed, rustic way, she spoke in the accent and the cadence of that part of New Orleans to which she was native, an accent that my late husband, A.J. Liebling, once described as hard to distinguish from the accent of Hoboken, Jersey City, and Astoria, Long Island, where the Al Smith inflection, extinct in Manhattan, has taken refuge. Point becomes pernt, and conversely, person becomes poison. Hey, poisons, bub. Accustomed as she was to public speaking, Mrs. Oswald did not seem to be addressing me specifically, but rather a large congregation. This was be her manner. This was be her manner. All right. That's what it says, right? This was be her manner. All right, Jean, you're not so eloquent yourself. This was be her manner with me on each of the 3 occasions I saw her, taking advantage of my anonymity in this quiet crowd and of the fact that her back was turned. I looked around the room in the snoopy way women do when they are in other women's houses and tried to think what sort of occupant I would assign to it if I did not already know who she was. The house itself was a white stucco bungalow divided into 2 apartments, and as I had come up the short path, I had noticed for rent sign at the approach to the other side. Each apartment consisted of a living room, dining room that then turned a corner and became a kitchen. Off the living room, there was a small bedroom, and off that a bath. The 2 kitchen doors debouched onto a common back porch, screened and looking out to a downward sloping lawn and pleasant shade trees. The space was limited, but Mrs. Oswald had arranged her furniture adeptly, so that I did not feel nudged or threatened, and the furniture itself, pardon my page turning, gingerly page turning, don't want to break the spine on this book, while it was middle-aged and had been nondescript all its life, except for a Danish modern chair upholstered in carroty polyethylene, was solid and in good repair and comfortable. The armchair I sat in was hard enough and soft enough, and there was an adequate table to the right of it, on which stood an ashtray, a small vase of artificial violets, and a copy of The Wounded Land, Hans Habe's high-strung book on the American state of mind following the assassination. I don't think I know of that book. The walls were that general color that can be called beige or ecru or bone or buff or oatmeal, and hanging on the longest over a sofa thronged with multiform and multicolored cushions was a print of Whistler's mother. The glass that protected it was spotless, and the brass identification plate was smartly burnished. I could not tell whether the picture was a recent acquisition or whether it was daily treated with polish and a chamois skin. Clearly, it was cherished. On another wall, but oblique to my line of vision, there hung what seemed to be a copper scroll. I wanted to get up and look at it, but I felt this would be presumptuous, particularly because it was over a writing desk where orderly piles of papers were laid out to which my Paul Pry eye would be bound to stray. Near the television set, it confronted the sofa and the vantage point. Oh, this damn book. From which Ben Casey would be observed was directly under Mrs. Whistler. There was a low tripod on which stood a jardiniere planted with crotons, with whose patterns were picked out in assertive shades of purple and red and leonine yellow. The health of these leaves was so obviously robust that they testified to a green thumb and made a puzzling contrast to the fake flowers and fake emperor grapes in other parts of the room. I had noticed the same phenomenon in the small front yard, where heather, far from home and made of wax and wire, emerged from a plastic pot toward which a few late tulips leaned their mortal, languid heads. Mrs. Oswald, pouring hot water over instant coffee, was saying, "I can absolutely prove my son innocent. I can do it any time I want by going to Washington, D.C. with some pictures, but I won't do it that way." And the footnote says, see Appendix 1, page 115. Do I have to? Do I really have to? I kind of think I have to. I'm not doing this. Maybe I should. But I won't do it that way. I want to get my story before the public, so young and old and all over the world, will know the truth. Why don't I go to Washington? With this question, she turned to face me, arms akimbo, embattled, but at the same time an imperturbable strategist. She answered it, because they've been so ugly to me and my boy. I'll write a book, and the title of it will be One and One Make Two, or this and that. Oh, I could write 3 books or 5 books. I could write books and books on I could write books and books on what I know and what I have researched. I hope she did. My own research, this cursory study of her living room, had yielded little more than the evidence that whoever lived here was a good housekeeper, of modest means and a mild affection for bric-a-brac. So I gave up my elementary sleuthing, and hoping to set her back in time to the days before the concussion that had stunned the world, I asked her about her early life in New Orleans. But if she had any nostalgia for that most raffish and romantic and sweet and sinful city, she had suppressed it, and she brushed me aside as if there were no time for frivolous parentheses when the business at hand was history. And I will interject here that I wish Stafford would shut the fuck up and let Oswald speak, because no one gives a shit what Gene Stafford thinks here. Now, maybe Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, she pursued, stirring the coffee, but does that make him a louse? No. Killing does not necessarily mean badness. You find killing in some very fine homes for one reason or another. And as we all know, President Kennedy was a dying man. So I say it is possible that my son was chosen to shoot him in a mercy killing for the security of the country. And if this is true, it was a fine thing to do, and my son is a hero. Is she saying that Kennedy had a terminal illness? I had not heard that President Kennedy was dying, I said. Me neither. Staggered by this cluster of fictions stated as irrefutable fact, some mercy killing, the method used in this instance, must surely be unique in the annals of euthanasia. Oh, yes, she went on with authority. My ignorance did not surprise her. She plainly was accustomed to dealing with people who, either through laziness or want of opportunity, did not know the ABCs of the case. It's been in many articles that President Kennedy was a dying president, that he had Atkinson's disease, which is a disease of the kidney, and we know that he had 3 operations on his back, and that he would have been a lingering president. For security reasons, we could not have a lingering president because of our conflicts with other nations. She turned to me with her sociable smile and asked, "Do you take cream and sugar, sweetheart?" Her affable face was round and lineless, and the skin that covered her small bones was delicate. Her eyes were clear behind glasses in pale frames, and her clean white hair, only a little smudged with leftover gray, was pulled back straight into a plump and faultless bun. Kind of like her ragged look there. She wore a lime green sheath that was appropriate to her short stature and her tubular, well-corseted construction. Totally tubular. She would, I thought, be called modish. Her general appearance and her demeanor were consistent with the several roles she had played in her 58 years. Insurance agent, saleslady, manageress of lingerie shops, switchboard operator, practical nurse. Terms of endearment came naturally to her lips, as they do to those of many Southern women. She could have been the stand-in and the off-stage voice for the woman from whom I had bought a rain cape in Neiman Marcus that morning, who rejected the first one I tried on, saying, "No, honey, that just won't do. Your little dress shows." A northerner is at first taken aback, then is seduced, then realizes sometimes too late that these blandishments are unconscious and wholly non-committal, and one need not feel obliged to reciprocate by buying the next rain cape. In this case I did, and it comes nicely below the hems of all my little dresses. Mrs. Oswald, having delivered my creamed and sugared coffee, reestablished herself with her own cup on the sofa beneath her generic sister. Fleetingly I wondered how Whistler, a noteworthy scrapper, had got along with Mrs. W. And continued, now it could have been that my son and the Secret Service were all involved in a mercy killing. I have thought about this seriously. We teach our boys to kill in war, and we don't think a thing about it. Yet, if these same boys kill someone on the street, they are lawfully put in jail or else electrocuted. which is right. So why wouldn't it be just a normal thing to have a mercy killing as of the president? She uttered the word normal without a suggestion of inverted commas. And I think this is exactly what she meant. As for mercy killing, she made that sound as commonplace as the use of aspirin to bring down a fever. If he was dying of an incurable disease, this would be for the security of our country. Now, when President Kennedy came to Fort Worth, Texas for one night, there was an article in the paper that said the maid at the Hotel Texas had fixed his room for him and had to redo the bed because he had his own hard mattress. Even for one night, he must have been a very bad man. I was momentarily startled, but realized that this was merely a slip of the tongue, and his rocking chair is still the way it was, with the towel in the back because he was in such pain. There floated across my mind a cloudy recollection of having heard after the assassination, I thought. It rumored that the president had Addison's disease, which is not a distemper. I thought it was Atkinson's disease before. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I read it that way, which is not a distemper of the kidneys, but a malfunction of the adrenal gland, and which, since the advent of cortisone, has become tractable. A victim of it can, with proper treatment, live out his allotted span of years. I asked Mrs. Oswald if she had meant this when she had spoken of Atkinson's disease. Yeah, it did say that. Once again, she found my interruption footling and answered simply, whatever, and put me down along with her coffee cup, which she returned to its saucer. As I was saying, as we all know, Lee Harvey Oswald, after leaving the Texas Book Depository, got off the bus and got into a taxi. This was right by the Greyhound bus station. Isn't it a strong likelihood that he went into the bus station to make a telephone call to the people he was working with to say the mercy killing had come off? Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But if he was guilty, why didn't he get on a bus and get out of Dallas? This theory fits in with the other theory. So, were they all subversive and in a plot, or were they all humanitarian and in a plot? The same people, though. I wondered if, in my musings on her lairs and penates, when she was in the kitchen, I had missed the exposition of this theory and the other theory, and rather tentatively apologetic for my slow-wittedness, I asked, the same people? Which people were these? They, said Mrs. Oswald, and shook hands with herself for emphasis. When I say they, I'm going to quote Mrs. Kennedy when her husband was killed. She said, they have killed my Jack, and I say they in the same text. They. Who are they? I have my own theory, and I'm sure everybody else has. There was one or two others that I can't recall at the moment to say they. I think Governor Connolly said, they are going to assassinate us all. It's always they. My interviews with Mrs. Oswald took place in the third or fourth week of the derangements in the Dominican Republic, and just as, in reading the reports of those, I could not keep the dramatis personae on the proper sides, or on top of the proper fences, so now they swarmed about me like gnats, midges, fruit flies, and sand fleas, impossible to differentiate. I could not find my way out of the buzzing mob, and so I bent my head and drank some coffee and closed my eyes and tried to concentrate. If my son was an agent of the United States, this should be known. I wonder why Chief Justice Warren had tears in his eyes when President Johnson asked him to head up this commission. I wonder why, she meditated, reading her palms. Did Chief Justice Warren have to whitewash something the public don't know about? Yes. Did he know my son was innocent? Perhaps. Who used my son? The CIA. This is the question I must find the answer to. Research and research until I can bring the truth to light. My son was killed on cue, and this I can prove. The television cameras were ready, and the TV directors gave the orders. I believe that. As I understand it, some very important men in the networks got in trouble, lost their jobs and everything, but that's beside the point. What I want to know is who used Lee Harvey Oswald. And I would like to know that as well. But I also have to go to work in a little bit, and I still need to read this other book as well, so let's close here for now. How far did we get? 18 pages. That's basically 1/10 of the book. All right, Bobs. Actually, that's 1/5 of the book. All right, that's all. Goodbye.